New tab. No. Over here.
And that is the first thing that happens when we go live. Alright, so we are talking about the Virgin Suicides. I saw this movie when I was a kid. I think it came out in like 1999.
I think I did too, but I didn't really understand it. I only remembered the ending scene.
I don't remember any of it.
I have not seen it.
Well, I watched it this month because I read the book last.
So how true to the story is it?
I thought it was really pretty dead on. Sofia Coppola captures, I think, the same kind of voice that Jeffrey Eugenides is telling it in. So I thought it was pretty spot on. They kept pretty much most of it. I like the book better, but I'd say it's one of my favorite book-to-movie adaptations.
Yeah, cool. Alicia.
Although I wear this shirt ironically because I did not really enjoy the book.
Oh, well, there you go.
It's not my kind of read. It was for me. Okay, so the first third, okay, I'm with you, and then the second third, I'm like, okay, when is something going to happen?
Yeah, it was really boring. I didn't even get to the second third of it. I don't even know where my book is.
Mine's on a ledge that's 8 feet in the air, so I don't have it either.
That's okay.
But I liked it. I really enjoyed it.
I also liked it. I found it was not terribly engaging and not much happens, but I still really liked it for kind of the food for thought, I guess, that it provides about the way that our culture talks about and interacts with the issue of suicide.
I also think his writing is beautiful. This is kind of the same way I felt about The Time Traveler's Wife, which is one of my also favorite books, where it's just nothing's happening, but the way that you're describing the scene is actually very beautiful. I could just keep reading this and feel engaged just because I'm picturing what you're explaining. But nothing really happens for a bulk of the book. It's just this, I don't know.
Yeah. Have you guys read any of his other books?
No.
Because I've read Middlesex, which is one of my favorite books, and also The Marriage Plot, and they're all very different, all very, very well written, but just totally different narrative styles, and it's kind of amazing that he can write such different books, but all really well done.
I own Middlesex, and people have told me to read it, so maybe I will.
You should. It's good.
Add it to the list.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of a long book. I don't know that it would be a good one to tackle in a month, but
okay.
I don't know. Catch-22.
That was a
longer than Middlesex.
Yeah.
Also, The Art of Fielding is pretty long too.
The Art of Fielding is so good. I loved that book.
You should have been part of the discussion because nobody showed up for it.
I didn't belong to the club at that time.
Okay.
I joined the club and then I left it because I own 300 books. And I was like, I'm never going to get any of my books read if I read a new book from this club every month. So I left the club and then I got bored, so I joined again. And I read The Art of Fielding, and I absolutely loved it. It's definitely one of my favorite books of all time. One of the best books I've read all year.
All right. Well, maybe we'll have to set up attempt number 3 at having discussion about that book.
We could do it. I haven't read it. I can see it on my shelf.
Yeah.
I gave up on it.
Oh, really? I really enjoyed it, but that may be because I live on a college campus, and so I was totally into the very accurate descriptions of what it's like to live in a college campus. But anyway, that's not the book we're discussing.
Yeah.
So I'm sharing my thoughts on it.
Let's talk about the book at hand.
I'm trying to find the question. I will agree with you guys that the writing was fantastic. I just, as a reader, I like more action. And I mean, that might come from, the YA that I read all the time.
Yeah,
And
that's what I was gonna say. Is like when you read a lot of YA, it's hard to read things that like don't move as quickly.
Yeah.
Although I'll tell you, I listened to The Martian at the beginning of the year, a couple months ago or whatever, and I mostly read adult books with you guys, and that one was intense. So I'm feeling, yeah, The Martian.
Is that new?
Yeah, by Andy Weir. I should put it on the list. So I'm looking at the questions or the suggested points for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm scratching my arm with a USB cord because my nails.
I'm gonna have to watch the movie because, like, I didn't understand who the narrator was. It's like
that's the first discussion question. Let's talk about it.
Yes,
Yeah.
That's the very first one.
Wait, stop! What are you doing? Sorry, I'm talking to my computer.
We're leaving you behind, Mel.
I tried to look at the discussion questions and then I tried to print, and there's no printer in existence. Stop trying to print.
Okay, so the first, in answer to your question, Pam, it's narrated through a collective voice of a group of boys. So the first suggested point for discussion says, the Virgin Suicides is narrated through the collective voice of a group of boys who fell under the spell of the Lisbon sisters 20 years ago. And then it asks why we think he chose this unusual method of narration, the effects of it, and the tone of the narrative.
So the way that I interpreted his choice of narration has to do with the fact that it was a mirror of the Lisbon girls and how, like, people got them mixed up and, like, saw them as, like, one collective unit as opposed to individual people, both while they were living and after they died. And I think that we kind of get a mirror of that in the fact that the narration doesn't distinguish any individual people. I mean, it talks about this guy and that guy and who got to go with the girls in this situation, and but the general narration is just very broad. And I think that maybe that choice had to do with the fact that he was trying to emphasize how people didn't see the girls as individuals either.
I think, too, it also speaks, like, on the same vein of how we view society. Like, when you're not part of a group, you feel, or, like, you often picture people as a group. And so, like, I'm not a teenage boy, but I think of teenage boys as being, like, very different, but also, like, kind of a collective whole as, like, a mentality or, like, the stage of life they're going through. And obviously there are, like, outliers in that. But, like, when you think of groups of people that you don't fully understand or that, like, you're not a part of, then sometimes you think of them in stereotype versions because you don't actually have an inside view of what those people are as individuals.
And in terms of storytelling, it also allows for more, like, this happened here, this happened here, this happened here. Whereas if you have a single narrator, that single narrator, that single boy would not have as much knowledge of what goes on as a collective narrator. So it kind of functions like a third-person limited omniscient.
Right, but with the kind of intimacy and feelings of a first-person narrator.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think, Meryl, to what you were saying, like, I think it emphasizes the separation of the Lisbon family from everybody else. That we is the boys, but it also is kind of like the entire neighborhood and how they all just kind of like look at the Lisbon family, but don't consider them like part of their neighborhood, but more like a spectacle for their neighborhood.
Yeah. I just thought of something. You said that the narrators or the group of boys like fell under the spell of the Lisbon girls 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that the book is set in the story, like the plot is set in the 60s or the 70s.
I think it's 70s.
like, that changes my whole, like, reading of the book, because I definitely did not know that.
Mm.
Yeah, I think, like, the only really reference point of that is probably the music that they're listening to, which isn't, like, super strong
Yeah.
thing because a lot of people listen to the same music still. But I don't know if anyone else picked up on any, like, time symbols. That was the only one, because I heard that after I was, like, most of the way or all the way through the book, too.
I think there were mention of some current events, but I can't remember any of them specifically.
Well, and somebody said that, was it, when they're driving to the homecoming dance, it's like, oh, these are, I think these people are Nazis or Nazi sympathizers. And that's like, okay, so that in modern times, that's not something I would typically hear a teenage girl say. But I think my view of when the book was set came from remembering costumes from the movie.
Well, that's cheating.
I didn't know it was a book when I saw it on television. This was before I got, like, weird about having to read the book first. I was, like, 16.
You're excused.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else you want to say about the narrators?
I thought it was interesting that it was, I mean, maybe this is wrong, but what I was thinking is, like, it's the boys who are adults reflecting on their own take when they were little of these other girls. So I thought it was, like, interesting because I was reading as though, like, these adults were talking about, like, what they perceived as children, and then kind of not fully reflecting, but reflecting enough to, like, give you an idea of social commentary beyond just, like, these are what little boys think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that he decided to construct it in such a way that it was like them as adults investigating what happened. So they talk about their own experiences, but then they also talk about things that happened to other people in the neighborhood because they did interviews with them, and they, like, went back and interviewed the Lisbon parents, and it was really interesting, and he didn't really ever give us a reason that this group of now men were, like, so obsessed with, like, understanding the Lisbon sisters. But again, I think that kind of is, like, commentary on how society treats suicide, that it's something to be analyzed and investigated, but they never actually, like, reach out and try to form a relationship with the family or try to, like, help them out. They just, like, see them as these objects for analysis.
Well, didn't people cry at the beginning? Like, after Cecilia, people brought food and stuff, and the mom just kind of, like, shuts them out.
Wait, what was your first question?
Sorry, I'm making noise.
No, about people in the neighborhood trying to reach out, and the family and to a certain extent, the family alienated themselves, and then people stopped trying.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think they were going through a period of grief, and they didn't know how to deal with it, and then everyone just was like, okay, they're crazy, leave them alone, and then just kind of speculated about them for the rest of the book.
I think it was kind of creepy how the boys were, like, obsessed with, like, when they went into their bathroom or whatever, like, stuff like that, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, like, one boy got to go into the bathroom and that was when he found the girl in the bathtub, and so then they all, like, questioned him about everything that he saw in the bathroom, and, like, they, like, collected little scraps of things that belonged to the girls.
Yeah, that was creepy.
I feel like it's creepy, but not unheard of. Like, I feel like when I was little, like, we did stuff. Not, like, necessarily like that, but we'd be like really curious about something, so we'd like investigate the inanimate objects that had to deal with that, so we didn't have to directly confront the source.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like he uses that kind of thing that kids and adolescents do as a model for the way that we think about people who commit suicide or are affected by suicide, and how it's like we don't know what to do, so we don't necessarily want to talk to them directly, but we do want to like collect evidence and like find, you know, explanations and analyze things, and you know, that's kind of what the boys do with the girls' belongings.
Yeah. And they do it, I don't know, I just thought of this now, but maybe they do it also as like, I mean, when people die, you kind of save items like heirlooms, like try to analyze like what happened by what, I don't know, like who they were and things like that by their objects. Whereas like they do this before they even die, but you know they're gonna die, so it's almost presenting that idea of death while they're alive, and that idea of like them as a time capsule of an unchanging thing before it even happens.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I forgot what I was gonna say. I don't remember.
If it comes back to you, spit it out.
Okay.
Should we go to a different question and come back if you're
Sure. Yeah. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. Is that I feel like there's also this theme throughout the book that you can never really understand what's going on in somebody else's head, and so that's why they go to these extremes of like interviewing other people and, you know, collecting belongings. And in this case, like, this is after the girls are dead, but the same holds true for the people who are living, or while they're living. Like, they never really know what's going on inside their heads, and they can only kind of make speculations and try to collect evidence. And you know, I think that's true for everyone. We can never really understand what another person is going through. We can only look at the evidence and you know, try to understand as best we can.
Yeah.
That's all. That's what I was going to say.
well said.
What's that? What happens at the end of the book?
They kill themselves.
I love how you're just so matter of fact about that.
What happens is they essentially like I don't know where you stop, but they like started this like relationship with the boys that was just through the phone, and so like they were like playing music for each other over the phone and like back and forth, and then they got in communication with the boys. They would like send them letters like in the middle of the night, like sneak letters in the mailbox. So they communicated with the boys to like meet them this one night, and basically the boys came over thinking that they were gonna like drive them away and like take them somewhere and live happily ever after somewhere else in this like place away from the city, away from their parents. And then the boys come over and Lux like distracts them while all of her sisters like go in various rooms and like commit suicide in different ways.
That's weird.
And then she says, oh, she's gonna go check on her sisters to see if they're ready, and then she goes into the car and turns it on in the garage, and then they like hear a thump, and so they go to like see what happened, and then they start finding them one by one, and then they like run out and that's fun.
Yeah. And all of them die except for Mary, who manages to survive, but everyone just treats her as if she's already dead. Like, they just talk about all the sisters collectively all having taken their own lives, and that's when they start like mixing up facts about them, and it's like Mary's still alive, but nobody's, you know, she's like recovering, but nobody, you know, wants to acknowledge that, because it's a much cleaner story to just talk about the 5 sisters who all killed themselves. And so eventually she has another suicide attempt and manages to take her own life that time.
And then the parents, like, basically leave.
Right.
And they remodel the house entirely and sell it to, like, a brand new married couple who got it for super cheap.
Yeah.
Well, if the boys were the ones who found the girls, that might explain their intense obsession with what happened.
Yeah, although they seemed intensely obsessed with them even before they died.
Yeah, before.
Well, yeah, true.
It explains why they have a continued obsession, like in their childhood. But I don't think it really explains the initial. I think the initial obsession is because they're teenage boys. And I think the continued obsession is because it had such a profound impact on them as teenage boys.
Box says have fun. Box says have fun. I was talking to Sarah. And she says have fun. She might join us next month.
Yeah, I saw that. That's good. I thought it was interesting the contrast between Cecilia's suicide and then the other sisters, because when Cecilia kills herself, everyone kind of says like, oh, she was the crazy one. Like, they don't really look for any explanations further than that, anything to do with, you know, the family or anything. They're just like, oh, she, and you get the sense that maybe she had some sort of mental illness. She always wore this wedding dress around and was kind of odd, and so people are like, oh, the like odd one killed herself. But they don't really look any further than that, it seems like. And so when the parents kind of start shutting things down more and more, the rest of the girls just become suffocated, and you kind of get the sense that they were pretty suffocated to begin with the way that their parents wouldn't let them out, wouldn't let them socialize. You know, like the party was the first, when Cecilia killed herself, was like the first big thing they'd done. But nobody really looks at that until it becomes clear that like the entire house is falling into disrepair, and the girls, like, nobody's going to school anymore, and it's just become extreme, and that's when they all finally all decide to do like the group suicide.
You look confused, Meryl.
I had a thought that was like that, and then I forgot it right when Jessica stopped talking.
Oh.
I was like, that was poor timing.
At least I'm not the only one that's happened to in the last 10
You know, Saturday.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I thought it was really interesting, too, that Cecilia is the youngest. Like, usually it's like the ignored middle child, or like the oldest, like, has too much pressure or something. But I thought it was interesting that it was like the youngest. Because usually the youngest is the one that's like catered to the most, or like, I don't know, in like stereotypical stories, not obviously all cases, but it's like weird that the baby would be the one to set off something kind of crazy, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, and I wonder if that was intentional. I mean, the first time she tries to kill herself, the doctor says to her, like, oh, honey, like, what does a 13-year-old girl know about life and death or something? She's just like, you know, you have no idea what it's like to be a 13-year-old girl.
They kept that in the movie. I was happy they kept that in the movie.
Yeah, that was like one of the only quotes I highlighted from in my Kindle.
I keep smudging my nails because my body is itchy. Back to book talk.
Okay.
So another question this is something I was thinking about. This is like the second to last discussion question. So the novel's title is The Virgin Suicides, but Lux, I don't know how you say her name.
I think it's Lux.
Lux is like super promiscuous. And so, like, why that title if they're not? Are we supposed to consider them virgins in another way, or what is that supposed to mean?
There were averagely virgin, or majority, I meant. Majority rule.
Well, there's some quote in there about the virgin suicides. There's like a passage they quote from something else, and I can't remember what it is.
I remember what you're talking about. I don't remember what it was either.
I don't remember that at all, but I may not have gotten that far.
Yeah.
I was thinking it might be along the same lines of that whole idea of the collective. So just like Mary is alive, but they don't see her as alive. They see all the girls as virginal because it's this like pedestal distancing type thing, and they're all just one entity instead of separate individuals.
Yeah.
That, and maybe it's like something to the fact that they never got to live. Like they never got to experience life.
Mm.
It wasn't just like they didn't experience sex. It was like they didn't experience what it was like to have a typical childhood. Like they were so like, I don't know, like even before Cecilia's death, like their mom was so overbearing and their dad was even at school, and so like they had this like protected life and they didn't get to experience much. And then when Cecilia died, it was like they're even more so like that. So like they're encapsulated almost in this like protected childhood that wasn't very protected at all.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Thanks.
I also think what Eli said is very true, that it has to do with this collective and how everyone just saw them as one entity. And so, you know, the media, the adults in the neighborhood, like, they may not have known that Lux went and had sex with all these guys all the time. Like, so they just like, oh, all these teenage, you know, virgin children all killed themselves, and without really knowing them as individuals and knowing if that was actually true of all of them.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to talk about?
I like the question, it says, how would you describe the Lisbon family and the relationship between its various members? Like, we learn a lot about Cecilia and Lux, but not a lot about three other sisters. And why, like, is there so much focus on these two sisters but not the others?
I think the way that I interpreted that is, like, to some extent, as the reader, we have to see the sisters as somewhat interchangeable because that's how everybody else sees them, and so we can't get to know each of them each of them as individuals very well. But at the same time, like, for example, knowing about Lux's promiscuity, like, gives us that contrast to the other sisters that we need in order to see that narrative about them all being the same is not actually accurate, or them all being virgins is not actually accurate.
And I guess Lux was also the one with the most connection to the boys. Like, she's the one who, like, sought the outside world more than the other sisters. And Cecilia and Lux were the two youngest, though, weren't they? So Lux the second youngest.
I thought she was older.
Maybe it was, like, Bonnie, Therese, Lux, Mary, Cecilia. Because there's that one point where they, like, ask her to the dance, and the dad's like, I can't very well change the rules for the younger sisters, and the older sisters have had to abide by them. When he wanted to take Lux to the dance.
Let's see. Oh yeah, I think you're right. Cecilia, Lux, Bonnie, Mary, and Therese in that order. Yeah, it must be youngest to oldest.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
So you have these, like, three older sisters who have more history, obviously, because they're older, and then they're the ones that don't get any voice really at all.
Yeah.
I think the relationship, too, between the parents and the girls is really interesting, too. Especially the mother, like, the commentary, just on, like, how protective she was, and then, like, I don't know, in a way, like, too, with, I guess it's, like, society explaining, like, how they viewed it, but so much, like, when suicides happen, they look at, like, the parenting, and are the parents responsible? And I think, like, the commentary on how overprotective they were, and, like, how different the family, like, was, and especially after, like, Mr. Lisbon left the school, like, how, I don't know, like, it was like they weren't blaming the parents, but they were kind of blaming the parents, and I felt like it was an accurate portrayal of what usually happens when a kid commits suicide. Like, he's responsible.
Yeah. Now that you say it, like, I'm thinking about how ironic it is that if you're an overprotective parent, it's because you want to keep your kids safe and you don't want anything to happen to them, and yet we're led to understand that, at least to some extent, it was their overbearing parenting that led the girls to have a miserable existence and then take their lives. Like, it's the exact opposite of what they were intending to do.
Mm-hmm.
I think in most cases, suicide isn't, like, anyone's fault except for the person, like, who kills themselves. Like, it's their decision. I don't, unless, like, they're a victim of a crime, then maybe it would be, like, the fault of the person that committed the crime against them. But, like, I think of, like, it was the parents' fault more in cases where, like, the kid does drugs or, like, does crime. Like, 'cause, like, the girls, like, decided to commit suicide on their own. Like, I don't know if it was really the parents' fault, except for, like, in this book it does make a good argument that, like, the parents were, like, pretty overbearing.
I think it's not so much the parents' fault that they committed suicide, but it's the parents' fault for putting them in this situation where they would be considering it so heavily. And I don't think you can actually say one way or another. And I think that's kind of the point. Like, I think Eugenides is kind of making the point that you can never really know what it was. Like, these are all the facts that we have. And obviously the parents, like, were there for the whole thing. They had a big role in it, but you can't say who is responsible for the outcome necessarily. Just like I think in real life, like, you can't really say what extent most people play in those decisions.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to make, that, like, suicide is always the choice of the person who does that. Like, that, it ultimately comes down to them. But at the same time, at least in this case, I think you can say that the parents created an environment in which the girls felt like that was, a reasonable option for them from their perspective. But that doesn't mean that they drove them to it, or that was their only option. The boys thought they were going to help them escape, like, and that's, I'm trying not to spoil the plots of other books, but there are other books where people get out of really bad situations by, finally, like, just running away. And, so that's, so no, I don't think that was, like, their only option left, to kill themselves, but I do think that their parents were a contributing factor in creating an environment where they felt like that was an option for them.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think it is like I think really the whole book is kind of commentary on how we view these types of things, even like in modern society. And maybe the fact that it was set so long ago is kind of saying that this has never changed. Like we haven't found anything different to this day. Like this is, I don't know, relatable because it's still recent history, but like it's still something that all of society kind of views in the same way, the same light.
Well, I don't think there's a way to standardize how to react to people's grief because everybody grieves differently. So it's really like gotta keep trying as opposed to shunning people like what happened to the entire Lisbon family.
Right. Yeah, I think it's still an issue that we consider suicide to be something taboo, and something to be looked at from afar and analyzed as something that happens to other people, but not really understood in a way that can possibly help prevent future suicides.
Yeah.
I think it's also something to think about, like, is that something that we really should be preventing? Like, I think in a way he, like, shows you what it was like to be in the life of one of these girls to the extent that you can know without being one of them. And then, like, I don't know, like, what would you do in that situation? You don't really know. I don't know. I think, in a way, like, there aren't very many ways they could have escaped, and maybe they didn't know where to go or who they didn't have any money, they didn't have any friends really. So maybe like in some ways, like he's saying, for some people this is the only option.
I don't think so. I don't think that that's ever the only option. I mean, I think maybe that in some ways society failed them in their school, and the resources in their community didn't reach out in a way that they could have to provide support for the family and for the girls. But I don't think that means that that was the only option left to them.
I don't mean the only option like in an objective way, but like the only option in their minds. Like they were in a situation where they could not get past that.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's usually where people are by the time they commit suicide.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I think if somebody commits suicide, it's because they think that that's the only option left to them. But I think that what we can get from this book is, we have an obligation to reach out and show people that that's not the only option. One of the questions on here is the fact that we know from the very beginning of the book that all 5 of the Lisbon sisters are eventually going to take their own lives, and like what, and so that does kind of take away the ability for this to be a plot-driven book, because we know from the beginning what's going to happen. We just don't know how or when or how that's going to unfold. But what do you think that does? Why do you think the author chose to do it that way, and what does that do to your reading of the book?
When I read it in the beginning, I don't know if you've seen the movie American Beauty, but like in the first 30 seconds he's like, this is who I am, and in 1 year I will be dead. And like the whole movie is like the events leading up to when he dies and like how he dies. And I think it's like the same concept exactly almost, but like a different story. But like these are the events that like how much changed in this amount of time. Like you want to see how like they start the book and it's like these 5 sisters who are really close, and like this little girl who like sees so much more for her age, and then you don't, and I guess like the fact that Cecilia dies before the rest of them, like you don't know that in the beginning. So I think like you approach it, well, I approached it more as like what led to these deaths, or like where is this going to go, or are they going to kill each like themselves at the same time, or all of them going to die? Like I don't think it tells you like really any detail other than at least 2 of the girls are going to die. Probably all of them.
I thought that that they were gonna kill themselves off like incrementally. I got that like sense when he was talking about the paramedics coming to the house. I thought that like they meant like they were gonna have to like come to the house 5 separate times. I got that sense.
Yeah. I'm really glad it didn't happen that way because I was thinking that too.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if it happened that way, I would have gotten bored really, really fast. Like I would have been like, all right, so the next Sister Day is all right. Like there are too many of them for that to be how it happens.
Right. That's a really good point, though, that he does set it up with that expectation by talking about how many times the paramedics came at the house, that this was, like, they eventually come 4 times, I think. The first time Cecilia tries to kill herself, the second time when she does kill herself, and then the third time when they do the group suicide, and the 4th time when Mary succeeds in killing herself.
Yeah.
So we get the sense that they're going to come each time, but it turns out to be some of those are attempts, and some of those are multiple sisters, and
I think if it's those for then also when Lux calls, because she needed to get out and she wanted a pregnancy test.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there were 5 times that they came.
Oh.
Forgot about that. Yeah, so that's, I mean, yeah, he sets it up, and the way that he introduces it even leaves some ambiguity, because he says, like, when Mary took her turn.
Yeah.
And so it's like, you know that each of them are going to try to kill themselves, but you don't actually know for sure that all of them will.
I thought it was also interesting that they all killed themselves in different ways. Like, every single one of them killed themselves in a different way. And I thought that was really interesting, that he, like, tried to cover. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Also, I don't know if you guys did this, but I was like, I don't understand how putting your head in an oven is suicide. Like, that sounds just painful and long, and like you would just pass out before you died. Like, you died. I actually had to look it up.
Sylvia Plath killed herself that way.
Yeah, I knew that too, and that's why I was like, oh, okay, so this is actually something you can do. But I actually, like, I don't know. Apparently you can't do it with modern ovens.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah, because they use a different kind of gas now.
Okay.
Interesting.
So if any of you are
Fun
planning
fact
to
today.
suicide, don't do that. It's not effective. It's just painful.
Okay.
That's what I got from the book. Okay, guys. All right.
Anything else?
I'm square. I'm gonna go back to the library and turn this in today.
Fun.
No, take your other pointer finger, and go the other way.
No, not the rectangle.
That makes a rectangle. She wants a square.
Oh, how about this?
Here, wait. I got it, guys. Square.
Yeah. All right. So next month we are reading Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Yay! Sarah said she's already reading it. She left another message on our Facebook page.
Good.
And I thought maybe we could try and work with her schedule and see if we can't, some way between the 5 of us, all get together.
That'd be great.
All right. So I'm going to stop the recording now. And we're not going to hear about any more Meryl's fingernails.